there's this false idea that once you hit that big number, everything will be fine and everything will work itself out. Unfortunately, that's not actually the case.
Right.
Because behaviorally, when you've been saving for so long and trying to get to that big number, starting to draw down that big number is really, really hard to do.
Psychologically
It is
damaging.
challenging.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so our purpose here is to really try to personalize that transition from the big number to income and to make that meaningful. Okay, let's say you have 2 million bucks. Great. What does that mean in terms of annual income for you? Okay, great. Maybe that can create, $80,000 a year of annual income. We're not worried about that running out. Great. Okay, then what? This is the question that no one seems to ask and no one seems to answer.
Mhm.
Okay, then what? How do you spend that well? How do you make that a meaningful, retirement? And
Right.
so what we're trying to do is we're trying to find meaning in that transition, and sometimes that's a little bit challenging. Hey, in today's video, we'll be covering why Fidelity may be wrong about calculating when you can retire, as well as some of the figures to actually consider. Over a lot of years in helping folks get ready for retirement, plan retirements, fix retirement plans. We've tracked the real savings patterns of successful retirees and discovered they're significantly different from the general guidelines that Fidelity gives. Now, they have great sample size, and we don't want to throw everything out, but we want to encourage you to think about it a little bit differently. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video today. So let's get right into it. Now, we can only cover Fidelity's savings amount in a small amount of detail here because we've got to move on to why they're problematic pretty quickly. But if you want to figure out your own retirement situation, map out exactly how much you need to save, how to minimize taxes, and how much you can actually spend, we've put together an entirely free quiz that will walk through all of this and more. And after you've completed it, what we'll do is we will create a detailed breakdown video personalized to you that is based on our planning process to give you the exact figures and help you get some clarity. To get accurate answers based on our actual process, click the link in the description. So it's funny, we were talking to a client earlier this week who came in pretty much in complete confusion about how much they needed to retire and how far on track they really were. They said about half the information they read said they were in a great position, and the other half said that they were not in a great position to retire. What we realized is there's not a great cookie cutter answer to help folks determine exactly what you need to retire. But that's why we've developed our process, and we built an entirely free quiz to help you determine how much you really need for retirement based on your real numbers. So click the link in the description, take it for free. Once you complete it, you'll get an entirely free video from us that walks through your exact situation, going through all the numbers and the most important details to help give you clarity and confidence about your retirement.
So we are taking on Fidelity, huh?
Well, I don't know if we want we want to take them on, but you know.
That's a big call, man.
It is. Well, here's the idea, and I think this makes sense to a lot of people.
Okay.
Fidelity has a great business. We work with them on some things. Obviously, they're the biggest monster in the room, but they don't provide personalized advice, really. In my opinion, that can be disastrous in the long run
Mhm.
for retirement. And so we want to talk through why that's the case and how we can think about things a little better.
Yeah, I mean, benchmarks are good. Benchmarks kind of help you understand, but there is nothing like personalized advice looking at your situation, looking at your desires, your hopes for the future, and what you want to do. That doesn't fit within a benchmark very well.
No, it doesn't. And I think this is where I want to be careful. Benchmarks are a decent starting place,
Sure.
but let's not pretend that they're everything and that it can take into account all of the nuanced situations.
Sure.
And ultimately, what we want to figure out, I mean, what's the real issue here? The real issue is, when can you retire?
That's a big question.
It is a big question, and it's one that we should take pretty seriously. There was a study that went around that I heard. I got to find it, but that said that Americans spend more time planning a 2-week vacation than they do planning their entire retirement.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And the stakes are a little bit higher on retirement.
Yeah. So let's go through, let our audience know exactly what the article said. Okay. And I think we'll have reference to it.
Yeah,
Will
we'll have reference
link
to it in the show notes here.
So basically, they're saying 10 years before retirement, typically age 57, 58, somewhere like that, you should have 5 to 6 times your salary in investments. Right?
Mhm.
5 years before retirement, say age 62, you should have 10 times. And 1 year before, you should have 12 times.
Mhm.
So that's what the article said. And I don't think those are bad numbers. We've done a previous show where we kind of talk about that, but again, we take it from a benchmark to
How do
what
we
should you do personally?
how do we personalize this, and how do we make this information actionable?
Yeah.
I think that's one of my frustrations with articles like this. It's like, okay, great, this is the benchmark that lots and lots of retirees should have. Okay, how do you make that meaningful for you and for your family and your situation?
Right.
And that's the part that I think throws everybody off,
Okay.
really. And so, look, the idea is the retirement is very simple. On one hand, when your assets can create more income than you spend, you can retire. I mean, this is the simplest definition of retirement. Your income exceeds expenses. But there's so much more to it to make that meaningful and to enjoy it. And unfortunately, due to the complexity of the financial system, it's harder to do this than it has ever been. And so we've got to work through these things.
Okay.
In my opinion, what this is not taking into consideration is that transition from assets to income. And this is where I think everyone gets thrown off. Now, it's easier said than done, but that's really what we have to do. And that's why our planning process works the way it does, because it's designed to help you translate the assets that you have and how are you going to use those to create income in retirement. So there's a lot of nuance in that transition from assets to income. And I think that's where people get stuck. We want to make sure that we account for Social Security, but we can't assume that Social Security is going to be everything. Some of that's just because of the taxation of Social Security. It's just more complex than that.
Well, I've got a friend who is disabled through the military, and he's my age, and he's making pretty good money from the VA, which, and I mean, like substantially good money, and therefore he would not need to have 6, 7, or 8 times what his income was, because his income's really good from another source that will probably never quit.
Yep. And that's a huge thing. And I guess that's really the whole point is we have to personalize this.
Yeah.
For it's retirement in retirement, income is more important than assets. And this is really hard for people to get their head around. It's really, really tough because they've been conditioned over a long period of time to get to the big number, whatever the big number is, whether that's 1 million, 2 million, and notice that there's always another big number after that one, by the way.
Yeah.
And there's this false idea that once you hit that big number, everything will be fine and everything will work itself out. Unfortunately, that's not actually the case.
Right.
Because behaviorally, when you've been saving for so long and trying to get to that big number, starting to draw down that big number is really, really hard to do.
Psychologically
It is
damaging.
challenging. Yeah. And so our purpose here is to really try to personalize that transition from the big number to income and to make that meaningful. Okay, let's say you have 2 million bucks. Great. What does that mean in terms of annual income for you? Okay, great. Maybe that can create, $80,000 a year of annual income. We're not worried about that running out. Great. Okay, then what? This is the question that no one seems to ask and no one seems to answer. Okay, then what? How do you spend that well? How do you make that a meaningful, retirement? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to find meaning in that transition, and sometimes that's a little bit challenging. So we want to think about this a little bit differently. And the way that we focus on planning is we're not as focused on hitting the big number. Now we have to project numbers and we have to get to those, but we want to optimize not for hitting a target retirement goal, but for having flexibility about when you retire, how you create income, and how that income is taxed. It's a little bit different than what traditional big companies are focused on, because they're just focusing on getting as much money as they can under their management, and that's fine. That's part of the business. But our focus is how do we create flexibility along the way so that you can always turn on or off that income, turn on or off the ability to retire. And so if you're 10 years out from retirement, it's a great time to start thinking about it and start planning. This is when we need to begin to think about when you're going to take Social Security, when you want to retire, and look at the tax efficiency of your plan. The sooner we start planning, the more flexibility we can have on taxes.
Absolutely.
And right now, at least at the time of this recording, we have a ton of flexibility in the tax system. taxes are at historically low rates, and we want to take advantage of that. So whether that's a year before retirement, you've even retired, we can probably do some still, find some savings there. But especially if you are, 5, 10 years out from retirement, these are the time that we can really make some big impacts. So around the 10-year mark, we want to make sure that we have the right portfolio, we have the right asset mix, we're not overpaying in fees and expenses, but we're starting to think about, where those additional income streams are going to come from in retirement and start to sketch that out. Now, as we get to, about the 5-year mark, this is where things get a little bit more intense, frankly, and we need to be a lot more thoughtful about this.
Yeah.
We call the retirement red zone the 5 years before and after your target retirement date.
Sure.
And there's a lot of stuff about this. We'll do videos about it. But the idea here is that the timing in which you get returns is more important than the average return you get in that period. And the question is why? Well, the reason is when you have to transition assets to income, it's more important that that is done in a thoughtful, systematic way. The average returns are not as important as when those returns happen. The reason is because when you're selling down the asset, you don't have the ability to recover anymore.
Yeah. That's a done deal.
This is a tricky thing, and this is where people really get trapped because they, 5, 10 years to retirement, they have a certain number they want to hit. Maybe they're not, their projections aren't showing they're going to hit that number, and so they take more risk. And they take more risk, and that risk can compound. The closer you get, the more risk you take, the larger that risk is, because we don't have time on our side.
Yeah.
And so this is not the time to be, playing around and hoping that the next hot stock is going to, change your retirement, because it might change your retirement.
Yeah. Well, and from a practical standpoint, once you're at 62, 5 years out, typically most people are now empty nesters and they're able to actually save some money and probably even back at 57. Most people, their kids are gone by then. And I think Fidelity's number is awfully high, or somewhat high, because during those years, you're probably still working, not traveling, doing things. You're able to sock away quite a bit of money. And so if you're at 62 and you're not at that 10 times mark, don't feel bad. I mean, it's probably going to be okay. And then particularly at 66, it changes even more. But yeah, let's.
And the hope is too that you'll notice that 5 years out from retirement, Fidelity is like 10 times salary, and then like 1 year it's 12 times.
Yeah.
Well, they're also assuming that your salary is going up in the last few years of your, that may or may not be accurate.
Right.
So
yeah, I think real life happens, and particularly at 66, you're probably going to downsize. I mean, we did. I did. I'm not 66, but we were in the big house with the kids and stuff, and we downsized, and pretty much always that's going to result in more funds that you can save. And so I think our point today is don't feel bad if you're not there, but
let's make a plan. Yeah, let's make a plan to
let's
get
make
there.
a plan to be there.
Something that we haven't talked about, but I think is a really big thing, and it throws off all the numbers.
Of course.
This is exciting, right?
Yeah.
This is based on their data over, number of years that they've accumulated. An error that people make is assuming that the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years are going to work the same way the last 10, 15, 20 years worked.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we're starting to see now, at least in some of our clients, is what the day-to-day life and what some of the big purchasing decisions and the way that people approach retirement is starting to change. They are starting to downsize and think about what they own and why they own it and what their lifestyle looks like differently than even folks, a couple years and definitely decades earlier had. They're thinking about it differently and looking at it differently. And that's the importance of customizing a plan, is going, just because this is what everyone else does doesn't mean that's what you have to do.
Right.
Let's figure out what is optimal for you. And something I love too is we can work with folks who are, they're not quite at retirement, but maybe, look, people tend to be a little bit healthier in their late 50s than in their late 60s.
Sure.
And, if we make a plan and you want to travel, you want to, do some of this stuff, let's do it before retirement. That's okay. As long as we plan for it, it doesn't have to be this big demarcation line before you start spending money. Let's spend intentionally now. So now that you know why Fidelity's retirement benchmarks are a little bit oversimplified, you need to understand one key thing. Their widely publicized savings targets are just generic numbers that If we get them wrong, they could derail your retirement or set you up, to not be successful. We don't want you to walk away from this video thinking these industry standard milestones will lead you to retirement success. That alone is probably not going to get you there. But the patterns we've uncovered and talked about after analyzing tons of retirement journeys over the years paint a very different picture. In fact, some of our most financially secure retirees would have been labeled behind schedule by Fidelity standards.
Sure.
It's really true. And so, the uncomfortable truth is about retirement planning in today's economy is that the one size fits all saving targets, they really miss critical issues like tax efficiency, income planning, market volatility, and just the changing demographics that we're in right now. But that's exactly why we created an entirely free quiz to help you determine how much you need to retire. So if you still haven't got the chance to check it out, click the first link in the description. It's completely free. Once you complete it, we'll send out a video breaking down your exact situation, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be personalized and give you an idea of what are some of the key things that you need to consider, going through all the numbers, your numbers personalized to give you a better sense of where you're at on track for retirement.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, so like, subscribe. We'll see you in the next video.
Okay, thank y'all.